Yes, now it is. I pressed the button. I can do this. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Okay. Again, I'm sorry, but look, no, this is symbolic because this is like Stanley Kubrick doing his thing with the multiple takes. No.
Absolutely.
No, unnecessary.
We're on
Okay, I agree. All right. Part 1, Obscurity and Absurdity. I am absurd. Let's go. Let's start. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to Screen View Mirror. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to Screen View Thoughts. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Patrick, a fellow Stanley Kubrick fan, and we'll be talking about Kubrick and the theme of war on screen. Hi, Patrick. Hope you're doing well.
Hi, good to be here.
Awesome. Well, we've agreed upon 4 films: Fear and Desire, Paths of Glory, Dr. Strangelove, and Full Metal Jacket. But this episode will only cover Fear and Desire as well as Dr. Strangelove, so please stay tuned for next week's episode, that is part 2 of the discussion, which will cover Paths of Glory and Full Metal Jacket. Just a brief note here, the reason I left out Spartacus from this list is because it's kind of... I mean, there's war in the movie, but it's not really fundamentally about war, and it's this just really long historical epic that Kubrick had little control over, and I mean, I don't know, Patrick, what do you think of, should we have included Spartacus in this list?
I do like Spartacus. It's definitely like a good film, and it'd be worth talking about Kubrick more broadly, but it's definitely not what I would consider a war film. Like if the conversation is Kubrick and war, we're good to admit it, I think.
Yeah. And the reason we included Fear and Desire is because even though Kubrick kind of hated the film and disowned it later on in his career, it's still, telling of his vision and his capacities as a director, but it's also very much to do with war and the absurdity of war and the absurdity of life and the sort of battle and struggle between yourself and yourself. So that's why we chose to include Fear and Desire and not Spartacus. But let's get back to the common themes of these two films. So today we're doing Fear and Desire and Strangelove. I'd say that the reason we grouped this in that manner is because the two films deal with absurdity, and absurdity in the context of war. So while Strangelove is more absurd in its style and in its form, Fear and Desire really tackles the absurdity in its substance, right? So with Fear and Desire, we're looking at a kind of a war of the self, which technically still fits into the topic of our discussion, but with Strangelove, it's more about the absurdity of nuclear war. And let's get right into both of the films. So, Fear and Desire. This was shot in 1953, and it's fictitious war. It never really happened. It's just an absurd fiction, really. And it opens with the following lines. Just for those of you who haven't seen the film, so you can get an idea, although I do recommend watching the films before listening to this podcast, because beware, spoilers ahead.
We will likely be saying spoilers.
We will likely be, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. Because then,
there will be some.
Exactly. There will be some spoilers. So the first spoiler is the opening line or the opening paragraph of Fear and Desire. And I'll read it out now from I got this from the script of the film. So the narrator says, "There is war in this forest. Not a war that's been fought or one that will be, but any war. And the enemies who struggle here do not exist unless we call them into being. This forest, then, and all that happens now is outside history. Only the unchanging shapes of fear and doubt and death are from our world. These soldiers that you see keep our language and our time, but have no other country than the mind." And so that is a very kind of highbrow opening for a film. This was Kubrick's, I think, one of his 2 first feature-length movies. And for me, was it his first one?
I'm fairly confident it was like the first one.
Okay.
I'm not...
Well, anyway, it was one of his first films. And just that kind of opening is, I don't know, it made me think that he thought he was being Eisenstein and doing the new Potemkin or something like that. Especially in the style of one of the scenes where the soldier kills the general, and you have that thing with the bread, the metaphor. So like instead of showing the guy's guts, it's showing soaked bread being smashed by the general's hand. But yeah, so that was pretty, but it was very Potemkin-y. Even though Potemkin is like what, 1920s, whereas we're in the 50s now. So Kubrick, come on, let's get with it. Don't worry, Paths of Glory was much better in my opinion. But back to the absurdism of Fear and Desire, or maybe he did this on purpose. Maybe he knew he was being absurd because he was talking about the absurd, and right? No, maybe
that's pretty meta.
That's, well, I tried. But, yeah, so back to the absurdism of the film and the idea of kind of struggling with the meaning of life and the war against yourself. I mean, you know, when I watched the film, it really reminded me of The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus. And he wrote this book. It's kind of like the guide to absurdism and existentialism, because in it he sort of describes that life is meaningless. You know, we don't really have an inherent purpose here as humans, and so the best thing we can do is just accept that meaninglessness, and strive to exhaust the limits of whatever is possible, and to be brave and to be free. And in order to be brave and free, you have to be absurd and absurdly do anything and everything possible with a passion. Because for the absurd person, there's no such thing as good or evil. You're going beyond good and evil. You're being absurd, and we see that with some of the actions of the characters. If Patrick, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like it. I was like, this is, you know, obviously it's one of those situations where, as much as I think rape and sexual assault in films tends to be maybe a bit of an overused device, which is kind of disturbing, I think in Fear and Desire it definitely fits, because it's, as you're saying, this sort of absurd delve into like these very dark and disturbing parts of like maybe human instinct, human desire. Hence the title. Hence the title,
exactly. It's about the fear of not having a real enough purpose, but then the desire of having that purpose. So even though this film isn't really about war, you know, you still have the soldiers, and you also have this war with yourself and the struggle in finding your purpose. And there's even a play by Jean-Paul Sartre, and it's called No Exit. And in that play, he kind of puts into motion one of the concepts from his book, Being in Nothingness, that being the look. So the idea that, you know, no man is an island, and that we are defined by the people around us, by the concept of the other, right? And so the metaphor in Being in Nothingness is that there's a person in a room, and someone else happens to walk past and looks through the keyhole of that room and sees the other person. And through the look, that other person kind of wakes up and is conscious of their selfhood. And then in his play, No Exit, which is actually, it's a very fitting play for an absurdism or an existentialism kind of, it's fitting because in the context of a theater, the audience can't escape, so they're literally stuck with the same characters in the same setting for a few hours. And in the play, there's a woman that wants to sort of put some makeup on, but there are no mirrors in the room, so she relies on the look of another woman to tell her how she looks like, and to tell her basically who she is. That's the whole metaphor of the face mask, right, so to speak, to identify who you are through another's look. And then going back to the film, we see that with, for example, the soldiers taking binoculars and seeing the enemy general. So they recognize him as the general, they recognize him as the enemy, and then through that, they understand who they are and what their purpose is. And this goes to, I'm sorry, I'm on a little bit of a rant, but I'll let you comment on this in a second.
You're just saying some good stuff.
Thank you. This goes to one of the quotes in the middle of the film, where one of the soldiers says, "We spend our lives running our fingers down lists and directories looking for our real names, our permanent addresses, but..." Wait, is it addresses or addresses? I don't know what's the stress?
I feel like both.
Is it
are
addresses,
correct.
addresses? I don't know, but you get what I mean here.
Yeah.
So the idea again of finding yourself and knowing who you are, knowing what your name is, and then the next line is, "No man is an island." It's a question. No man is an island. So he's asking, no man is an island. Is that really true? No, we are not islands. Selfhood is not an island. This is what the French existentialists were saying, that you're defined by the other. And yeah, and in the context of war, that's very much true, because take any two opposing sides and they define each other, right? Carl Schmitt, friend versus enemy. They define each other as opposites that have a purpose of doing something that's coherent to the definition of themselves. So yeah, that's my take on the existentialism of the film. Patrick, if you want to comment further on this.
I think you're absolutely right. And also the quote you mentioned where they say looking for our real names or permanent addresses is really important, I found, just because it's this idea of like this concrete, tangible identity like within society more broadly. But as the opening monologue that describes, we're not really in a real concept of society. We're not in real history. This is some sort of like fake constructed conflict that's existing outside of our real, this constructed conflict situation outside of what's, our reality. It's not a war that has ever happened or really ever will happen. And so these soldiers are living in this like purgatory of identity almost, where their only real chance at existence and purpose is to just do the things that are necessary in war. So like you said, they see the general and they're like, oh, well, I must now kill general. That is my purpose. That is what I have to do. And the idea that, they're sort of, like you said, defining themselves by what they're vilifying, by their enemies. If you go back to the idea of the other, which you briefly mentioned, it's very much based on the notion that to define a circle, you only find the center of it and the inside of it by drawing a border and defining what is outside. So the idea that you're sort of like abjecting and pushing away, oh, these are my enemies, therefore I am me without them. But then in this situation where we don't have any like countries that are fighting, right? We don't know which side of this war is like the good or bad side, however history would remember it. So you're just kind of seeing people vilifying each other for no real purpose other than we are in war and we must kill.
Yeah, I agree. But then going back to sort of the killing aspect, because of course it's very relevant to the theme of our discussion. There's a moment in the film where yes, there's a moment in the film where the two of the soldiers, played by Kenneth Harp and Stephen Coit, they play both two of the soldiers and they play the generals that they kill. And of course, okay, this was one of Kubrick's first films. I can understand the budgetary reasons for this, but I highly doubt that that's the sole reason that he chose that. I mean, come on, you could have had two extras on set, but no, he chose to get...
Like, you'd think you could have at least gotten, like, a friend to do it for, like, low money. Like,
Exactly. But no, he chose to have, two of the actors kill themselves. And so I think this is an allusion to, first of all, well, what are they doing? They're actors, they're performing a role, and sometimes you have to take one of your masks off, or you have to stop performing a certain role in order to live in freedom and in order to live the absurd way of life, right? Going back to the existentialism. And so to have themselves kill the other role that they played was very, I don't know, poetic in a sense, because sometimes you have to kill a part of yourself in order to live in freedom. And that's, yeah, I think that the substance and the message of the film was very much philosophical and interesting, but it was my least favorite of the four because it lacked in style. I mean, it didn't feel like Kubrick, you know, it didn't look like Kubrick. The acting wasn't good, and you could tell it wasn't...
The acting is pretty trash.
Yeah, kind of trash, yeah.
They're doing their best.
Yeah, they did their best, and it wasn't a bad movie. But yeah, if you have anything else to mention with regard to the film?
There is one thing I want to go back to with Fear and Desire, because there's, like, probably my favorite part in the film is right after one of the soldiers, unfortunately, rapes that woman and then kills her, which, as we discussed, is, awful and not fun to watch. But hey, it's what happens. He says the line, before I was a general and now I'm a fish, because he was, like, imitating a general before, and then after he says that, he, like, runs into the water to just kind of swim and have a fun time as if nothing's wrong and nothing's even going on. And to me, it's maybe a bit of a stretch, but there's a novel that I read about a year ago that had kind of a similar moment. It's by William Faulkner. It's called As I Lay Dying. It's like a Southern Gothic type of novel about this woman who dies, and her family, like, goes on a little adventure to try to bury her. And the youngest son, his name is Vardaman, and he's trying to, like, understand the idea of death and of life, trying to just understand everything that's going on around him as best as he can. And so there's a chapter from his perspective where it's only one sentence, and it just says, "My mother is a fish," because as soon as his mother died, he was catching a fish, so he, like, associated death to fish. So now, okay, my mother's is like the whole end of his arc, kind of. So I think it's interesting to me that these are such similar stories, right, about, like, the identity, the self, and sort of defining oneself in a sense. And they both seem to go back to the idea of the fish, and they did kind of to explore identity and death and violence and all that. So it's interesting for me to consider maybe why they wanted to do that, both Faulkner and
I don't know. Maybe it's because fish go with the flow. Because, I don't know, they're in water, they're flowing.
They're in the water,
Yeah, which is a fish. Look, fish are perhaps the most absurd animal out there because they go with the flow, and they're not subject to any current. No, they are, but... Well, I mean, in a river, in the sea, it's different. But that's beside the point. I mean, we understand the illusion, I guess, that Kubrick made here, but also...
We're familiar with water.
Yeah, and then he said, like, first we're a bird, and then we're an island. So that's kind of doing the metaphor of first we're free, right? Before we're born, we're free, and the moment we're born, we become this sort of isolated island. But then that notion of selfhood being an island is questioned throughout the movie. Literally in one of the conversations, I can't remember their names, but the soldiers kind of ask each other, no man is an island, but if you're defined through the look of the other, then, selfhood can't be an island, so...
Then you can't be... I think if we look at it that way also, it can be interesting, the bird to island and then general to fish, those two sort of positions that are being put forth there. If you look at, like, the fish as evolutionarily being sort of what we came from, then I guess in a sense becoming a fish is like returning to, like, this sort of idea before consciousness, before self, right, before humanity.
Yeah.
And in a sense, if you go back to the whole general thing, how they play the soldiers in the general, it could be interesting to determine how perhaps defining a self and, existing, going with the flow, as you say, maybe necessitates a certain eradication or killing of the self, or at least a part of the self,
Yeah. No, I agree.
To try to become, even though we can't fully be an island.
Yeah, I think maybe Kubrick was just going through an existential crisis when he did this film, because...
He wasn't having a great day.
But listen to these lines. What are you living for anyway? To make talk? Why? I'm trying to simulate the acting of the film, so just so you know, it wasn't great acting. Why? Why is your life so precious? Why? The only reason is to hunt for the reason. But I can stand in the way of a man with a reason to die. But, on a serious note, these are very existential questions. Like, the film ends with nobody ever being designed for this world and no one really belonging, and us having to find our way, find a flow to go with, right? Like the fish. And yeah, and so again, the substance of the film, very interesting. But for me, it was my least favorite because it just lacked a lot in style, and it wasn't Kubrick being himself. It was Kubrick trying to be Eisenstein, and it did not work, I think.
Unpopular opinion, I do kind of love it. I don't know. Everyone seems to not like it. I think it's pretty fun. It's definitely my least favorite Kubrick film of the ones I've seen, but I don't know. I kind of like it. It's really over the top and dumb in your face, and I think Kubrick specifically a little too hard on it. But
yeah, Kubrick probably, but oh well.
The last Kubrick film, like it's still a good watch,
Yeah. So next up, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. So,
yes.
Yeah, this was filmed in 1961, and it's actually the only film that talks about the war that it shows during that sort of during the time of the war in history, right? So the other films, they either occurred...
War was, like, going on.
Exactly, right? So Paths of Glory, Full Metal Jacket, they happened, after World War I and the Vietnam War were over. And then with Fear and Desire, we had this fictitious war that never really happened. But, Strangelove was about the Cold War, and it was set in 1961. So here we have this completely different dynamic and a completely different tone as well, because unlike the other three movies, this is taking something serious, but... exposing it comically, almost exposing it like with this new level of apathy and satire and just humor and hypocrisy exposure. It's a brilliant film. It was funny. The thing I liked the most about the film was probably the names of some of the characters, like Major King Kong or President Merkin Muffley. That's just weird.
Amazing.
But yeah, I mean, the film tackles the question of what happens when war goes too far and we get the possibility of nuclear annihilation. And the tone, again, it's very satirical. So what was your favorite thing about Strangelove?
Just the sort of detached, like, ironic humor of it is so funny, and the hypocrisy it shows. There's two things that stood out to me, and the hypocrisy, the sort of satire innate within it. And I know it's like the most iconic line probably from the movie, and everyone references it, but when two of the people are like sort of fighting around because the Russian ambassador showed up, and the president walks up to them and says, "Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room."
Yeah.
I know everyone talks about it, but it's just so damn funny.
No, absolutely, yeah, and hilarious. It's about I don't know, the film alludes to a lot of the problems of communication during the Cold War. So not just, communication within both of the Eastern and Western blocs, but also communication across the channel, basically.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's a funny movie. Like the moment they're in the war room, and Major King Kong is explaining to President Merkin Muffley, he's saying, "Well, all I'm saying is that we should aim for at least 10 to 20 million people killed." That kind of blatant exposure of their love of war was just comical. But it wasn't entirely rooted in truth. Because here's the thing. For me, satire is the meeting point between logic and humor. That's when real good satire happens. And if it's not grounded in truth, because humor, it's an involuntary response. So when someone laughs at something, they know that it's true, right? Or they know that it's completely ridiculous and therefore untrue, but either way, both situations require you to know what the truth is and what's being implied. So because it's so satirical and funny, we can very much argue that it's not completely distant to the truth. And it's true. I mean, like, sometimes military situations get out of hand. Well, sometimes, but world targets and megadeaths. That was the title on his file of like targets in megadeaths. We're not just talking about deaths. No, we're talking about megadeaths. We want millions killed. And they're targets, right? This is peace is our profession, as the propaganda posters said, with the barbed.
That was the other.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The barbed wire, the guns, and then peace is our profession. It's very 1984 like, I think.
And I don't think we can also overstep the very, very funny character of Strangelove himself. Because, Christ.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, Peter Sellers did a brilliant job. Because he played three characters. He played Strangelove and the president and the British guy, right? The general, I think.
What?
No, not the British guy. But I know he had three roles. But no, I'm pretty sure it was the British guy, too. No?
It was only the titular Mr. Strangelove, but hang on.
No. He played three roles. I'm telling you, he did.
What?
You didn't know?
Hang on, I got it. I did not. I thought he was just Strangelove.
No, yeah, he did. He played three roles, and it was so funny because it was basically him responding to himself.
President Merkin Muffley, Dr. Strangelove, and Group Captain Lionel Mandrake, who's the British.
Yeah, the British guy. Yeah. So, I mean, he was brilliant. He was also in Lolita, which Kubrick filmed, I think, before or after? I think after Strangelove.
Hang on. That makes this whole thing so much funnier.
I know, because he was basically responding to himself, wasn't he? And
especially when you consider both of the absurdist films that we're talking about have characters playing like,
different roles. Yeah.
But more specifically, like, opposite each other, right? Like,
yes.
It's almost binary, like...
Yeah. So roles that are basically. But no, Strangelove is this recycled Nazi who's toward the end of the film, he's talking about fertility and living space, so like Lebensraum, and he's referring to President Merkin Muffley of the United States as the Fuhrer. And even towards the end, he does the Nazi salute, and he manages to stand up from his wheelchair and walk because he gets so sort of excited about the notion of nuclear annihilation, basically, and 10 women per man, as he puts it. And I think the underlying sort of thread of poking at male insecurity, basically throughout the film, is that Kubrick takes kind of nuclear impotence and compares it to sexual impotence. So he's poking at the male insecurity of, not being strong enough, not being powerful enough. And that's not necessarily just a male insecurity. It's also a Cold War insecurity, and both sides wanted to be, most powerful, and they wanted to win the Olympic Games and the chess and the war and the space race. And
my nukes are bigger than your nukes.
But like basically, and when the American guy, what was his name? Not King Kong, but the other one. Anyway, I forgot his name, but he says, we need fresh water to replenish our bodily fluids. Have you heard of a thing called fluoridation? Do you realize it's the most dangerous communist plot we've had to face? So he's taking his own insecurities, he's projecting them onto the enemy, but it's done in a funny way. But this is 1961. Can you imagine people just watching this movie, and then outside of the movie theater, there's the actual threat of nuclear war?
That's absolutely insane.
Yeah, the insane movie, very funny movie. I don't think Kubrick made a movie quite like it ever again.
No. Definitely sticks out as his most unique one, I'd say.
Yeah, you know what they say about Kubrick? He's not going to film a same movie twice. He's just going to do 100 takes.
100 takes, yeah. I also really the title, like when you look at the full extended title, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, because that fits for a lot of thematic reasons. Like there's the reason you're pointing out, which I hadn't really thought when I first saw it, but I think is really interesting, the whole like male sexual insecurity, right? Like, stop worrying and love the bomb. Then also, if we look at that layer of like existentialism and absurd that we were talking about, or For Fear or Desire, it's like, oh, well, you know what? Nuclear fallout is going to happen. So fuck it. It might happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's both this sort of absurdism and this comical insecurity poking, basically. But the film ends on the note of "We'll meet again." I don't know who sings that. Who sings that song? Do you know who sings that? I don't know who.
I do not.
But it's like this kind of 50s song. We'll meet again. Don't know where. Don't know when. But that's also what I want to say to you, Patrick. We will meet again.
We will meet again.
Exactly, for next week.
Vera Lynn who sings "We'll Meet
Oh,
Again."
Vera Lynn, right? Yeah. I thought, but I wasn't sure, so didn't want to make a mistake. But yeah, good. Thank you. So Vera Lynn by "We'll Meet Again." "We'll Meet Again" by Vera Lynn. Thank you all for listening to this first podcast episode in this Kubrick series. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, Patrick, and thanks again for coming on to Screenview Mirror, and we shall meet again.
We shall.
Thank you. Thanks again. All right. See you next week. This was Screenview Thoughts.